My name is Johan Pekkari. I am the Deputy Chief of the Policy Plans Department at the Swedish Armed Forces Headquarters. I came across design by people within my staff attending courses at the JSOW, and we have also had courses at the National Defense University here in Sweden, in which people from my staff has attended. So that was the way I came across design the first time. This year I was the sponsor for a design course at the National Defense University as well. So that was the first time for me personally to come across design thinking and how it works and what kind of result you can get out of it. During that sponsorship, the design question was what could a Swedish total defense concept look like in 2045? Since I'm also responsible for our long-term planning or forecasting, that was a very interesting question for us to study or to develop or to dig into. So I think we came to some very fancy and maybe futuristic results. However, we also came to some very useful and results which we will definitely use for the further development within our staff here at the Armed Forces Headquarters. And having said that, how do we plan to use design thinking in the future within our headquarters? I think it's really too early to say, actually. We haven't implemented it anyway yet. However, we will continue to sponsor the course at the National Defense University. We will also attend the course, of course, with some people from the staff, and probably I think we will implement design thinking in one way or another in our future long-term planning, because our initial lessons learned is that it is very useful to use design when it comes to especially future capability questions and alike. For example, our forecasting for 2045 as we are working on right now then. And to use it in a way to answer the question, how can we transform this future into something that is to an advantage for us as an armed force? For example, and maybe that is not so strange, during the course that I promoted or sponsored this year, when we discussed the future Swedish total defense concept, we didn't only look at it from a Swedish perspective. We looked at it from a Nordic perspective for all the Nordic countries, and I'm not sure we would have done that in a completely traditional planning process, because then you are sort of in your box. Sweden is the limit, and now you began to look at it from a completely, or at least an additional perspective. And that is one example of how we used design this time to come a little bit further compared to what we would have done without design thinking. I do think we have an opportunity to implement it in our traditional processes and so on. However, I think it is useful to have both the traditional planning and the design thinking processes going on in parallel, because then you can merge the conclusions and the good thinking from both these processes together, and hopefully find something that is greater than each of them on their own. 1 + 1 becomes 3 maybe, or at least the design thinking process provides additional information or thoughts or whatever we call it into the planning process, so we can reach a little bit further compared to what we would have done if we would have only used the planning process. We need to take it in a little bit of a step-by-step approach. Maybe in the first place, have some more colleagues attending the courses, as I mentioned earlier. And in the second step, find some defined area or defined challenge to address with a design team, to try it on something that is part of our daily business or part of our normal processes, and try to use design thinking to get some influence from that perspective, and from that being able to further develop design thinking within our organization when we feel that we have something that works for us. Because I think design thinking is a little bit of an area that you need to adapt to your own organization and find your way of doing it. I think the most important part is that it helps us to enable some space for creativity, and it will also assist us in promoting innovation. So to get that extra creativity for the organization or for the planning process, that is one of the most important parts for design thinking. And I really like the design thinking from the perspective when I myself tried a little bit of it, and I realized how sort of locked into my own space I was. It is really hard to think outside the box and try to look at challenges, problems from additional perspectives. I tend to look at it without knowing it from the same perspective at every time. So design thinking is really useful for getting those additional perspectives and creativity that you really need to address those challenges that we have today and in the future, of course. I think we are more limited than we think we are, and therefore we need to find new ways to address the challenges. I must say it is fun as well. Also, when I looked into it myself, the small parts of it, and just to identify your own constraints, the way you think, you're very doing it in the very same way, and then identify that, oh, I'm not so flexible and creative as I thought. So that is very fun and interesting, and also as in my case, I when I was a sponsor for the course at the National Defense University, to see the creativity in the design groups, the design teams, that was something, very fantastic. Actually, they came with a lot of ideas that I would never have been able to think of myself or in my planning team here at the headquarters. So there is something there, and it is quite fun along the way ahead as well.